Richard Boyd of Invizius, and he is going to give us a little bit of an overview of what his journey has been like in the life sciences industry since he started. So welcome, Richard.
Well, thanks, Ewan. Thanks for having me. I'll do my best.
And I'm sure your best will be wonderful. So let's just get straight into it then. Tell me about your background and upbringing. Interested to know, I suppose where you come from as much as anything else, because I don't know that.
Okay, well, contrary to what you might think from my accent, which is admittedly rather anglicized, I was actually born and bred on not far from Glasgow, in the Wata, in Helensburgh.
Right.
So I was born in the house that my mother still lives in, and educated in Scotland. Apart from university, I went to Oxford for my university, so maybe I could blame my accent on the 3 years spent in Oxford. And then I have had spells working abroad, of course, but so I'm born and bred. I'm a born and bred Scot. I just need a bit more of the accent.
You anglicise yourself neatly. You went down south to university and you did an engineering degree, am I right in saying that?
Yes. So if I was properly bright, I would have probably gone to Cambridge to do engineering, but I had to settle for Oxford, and I did what they call engineering science, which is a bit of this and a bit of that. But I can attribute my career, such as it is in life sciences, to my time in Oxford, because my tutor at Oxford was a very brilliant guy called Professor Brian Belthouse, who, as well as being a sort of brilliant theoretician, was a very practically minded engineer who liked to solve biomedical problems. He liked to solve real world problems for patients. And he's probably best known for being the sort of technical founder of a company. Gosh, I'm going to forget the name now, but it was actually Oxford University's largest exit at the time. It was a needleless drug injection device that he invented, and which they didn't quite commercialize. Actually, they became a vaccine company ultimately, but Brian was the sort of technical brains behind this business, and I'm struggling to remember the name, but it'll probably come back to me before the end of the project. Anyway, I actually got a lot of inspiration from Brian, so that stayed with me. The early part of my career was actually in shipbuilding.
Right. Okay.
Oddly. So being a son of the Clyde, by having graduated with this degree in engineering, I managed to get a job in shipbuilding, naval shipbuilding, at the Scotstoun Yard. I think it's now part of BAE Systems.
Right.
At that time it was Yarrow Shipbuilders, and they built frigates. And when I was really inspired by the incredible complexity of designing and building a warship. If you've ever seen slices of warship being built in a shed, and you come to appreciate just how formidably complex this is as an engineering task, because there's literally no space. I mean, there's space to walk down a corridor, but everything is just jam-packed. So it's quite a feat of engineering, designing these things and actually assembling them and putting them together. So that was my first job out of university. I was a production engineer in shipbuilding, and then I went into the design side. I was a project engineer for a new frigate for the Malaysian Navy, and that sparked a lifelong interest in product development. So I actually went from shipbuilding to an MBA to an operations management consultancy called PRTM, now part of PwC. And PRTM's specialized, amongst other things, in helping companies streamline their technology and product development processes. So I worked for a number of years for a number of large or mid to large size tech companies, fast growing tech companies who had sort of lost control of their product development process.
Right.
New product development projects just taking too long, getting gummed up in the system, and so they were pouring lots of money into R&D, but not getting nearly enough out. So my job
to go in and
my colleagues there was to help them sort of unstick that, and it was extremely successful. I mean, we would typically shave 30 to 50% off the product development cycle time, and sort of multiply the return on investment that they were getting from their R&D dollars.
Yeah,
so that was really interesting work, but it was hard work because it was 4 days a week at the client site, and the client could be anywhere in Europe and occasionally in the US. So I was literally sort of living out of a suitcase from Sunday night to Thursday night, and having a rather sparse weekend. When I got married, and we had our first child, I packed that in and decided I needed to do something closer to home. So I got into working for sort of consulting to universities and very small spin-outs of startups, tech companies locally in Scotland. And I was all the while thinking I'd like to get involved with or start a medical, medically oriented business.
Going back to your roots.
Eventually, going back to my roots, going back to Brian Bell House. And anyway, my first medtech venture was Vuclar Cardiovascular, it was called, and that was effectively a spin-out from Dundee University.
What was that one about then, from a product point of view?
Well, that was, we were developing a type of stent, a peripheral stent. So not going in the heart, but going in the legs. And one of the problems that you have with stents is that once they're in the patient's body, it's very hard to see what's going on inside the stent, and that's an issue because one of the complications of stents is that they tend to block up, either with blood clots or with what's called restenosis, which is a sort of scarring and growth of the tissue inside the stent. So the stent's there to open the vessel up, and you end up with the vessel in effect closing again. And if you were able to see inside the stent non-invasively, then you would be able to anticipate that process and maybe do something about it. But you can't see inside the stent, not easily anyway. So this was actually an imaging technology which we could integrate into stents and enable them to be imageable in an MRI system. And so it was a very interesting idea, and we raised money, and we actually took the business all the way to exit. The business was, we received an offer for the business from from a listed company. And we went through due diligence, and we were getting excited at the prospect of being bought. And then unfortunately, their major shareholders vetoed the deal because they didn't agree with the strategy behind it. So it didn't happen. So that was my first venture. And not long after, I got recruited to be the CEO designate of Invizius, which is, well, that started life as a project funded by Scottish Enterprise and their high growth spin-out program. And they had this technology for effectively hiding the medical devices from the immune system to prevent foreign body response, which could be the origin of complications, actually including the problems with stents, right? And they with stents blocking up, and actually they thought that this technology would be good in stents, and so we should recruit Richard because he's coming from the stent world.
Makes sense.
As it happened, I quite quickly disabused them of the idea that stents was the best application for the technology, for various reasons, not least that we found a very much better application for this technology, which is hiding dialysis equipment from patients with kidney failure. So your kidneys stop working. And you, if you have little or no kidney function left, you have to go on dialysis or have a kidney transplant. Typically, it's dialysis first until such time as a transplant is available, if it ever becomes available. So these patients they're having their entire blood supply cleaned 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time, and that cleansing process involves the circulation of their blood supply through a filter. The filter is a very large foreign body as far as the immune system is concerned, and that foreign body response causes serious life-threatening problems for the patient. Basically, it's highly pro-inflammatory and pro-coagulatory, and so you set off. You have this sort of excessive inflammatory insult to the patient, and that eats away at their kidneys. If they're patients that have temporary kidney failure, they're hoping to get their kidney failure back. Their kidney function back, but going on dialysis actually, through this
triggers even more
inflammatory insult, actually ends up damaging their kidneys further and preventing recovery. It's the great sort of irony of dialysis. You have to have dialysis to stay alive, but it's not actually good for you. So the idea of Invizius is to use this very, very clever biological invisibility cloak, to borrow from J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, to use a biological invisibility cloak, which you add to the existing priming solution that's used to flush all the air out of the machine before the patient starts their session. You add that invisibility cloak, which is a protein, to the existing priming solution, and during the priming procedure, it coats all of the blood contact surfaces and hides them from the patient's immune system, and you prevent this inflammatory insult. And so, what we're looking to do is help patients who have acute kidney injury, that's to say a temporary failure in their kidney function, to recover their kidney function more surely than they would currently. And bear in mind that approximately a third of patients with a severe acute kidney injury will not recover their kidney function. And that means that they are heading to a lifetime of dialysis or a kidney transplant. So that is a tragedy for them personally.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly expensive for the healthcare system. These are, a kidney transplant costs over $400,000 in the US, and dialysis costs over $80,000 a year.
Right. Okay.
So patients, if you can prevent somebody going on to dialysis, you are, you're going to help them live longer, live better, and you're going to save an absolute fortune for the healthcare system. So that's the game that Invizius
is. Sounds like a great opportunity, I suppose, for transforming people's lives. Where are you at with it now then? Are you where are you at with it now? I should ask.
So we have just in the last weeks completed a first in human clinical study, and so a small number of patients in Manchester. We worked in Manchester because our first clinical advisor, Professor Sandeep Mitra, is based there.
Right.
And Sandeep is, we were incredibly lucky, actually, fortunate to have Sandeep in our team, because he's one of the biggest names in dialysis and nephrology in the world, let alone in the UK. So Sandeep has always been hugely supportive of this technology and this concept. So we always imagined starting our clinical development with Sandeep, and so it was. So small number of patients getting a single administration of the product, which is called HGuard. HGuard. And what we do is we track the patient's immune responses. So the innate immune responses, inflammation, coagulation, we can actually track those processes before, during, and after the dialysis session with using HGuard. And we do the same thing with the same patient in a dialysis session before and after the dialysis session with HGuard. So it's a so-called crossover study design, and that allows you, so each patient is their own control, and you get a direct read of what, in our case, we're looking to see, does HGuard hide the dialysis equipment from the patient's immune system?
Yep.
And does that prevent the excessive inflammation that is the root of the problems caused by dialysis? So, we've not officially announced the results of that study, but I can tell you that we are very pleased.
Good. Excellent. That's fabulous news, and not just for you guys, but I'm sure for an awful lot of people around the world. So,
if in the case of patients with severe acute kidney injury, Ewan, there's about 1 million of those a year in US and Europe.
Yeah.
And if there are any investors listening, this is a lot of patients. But given what's at stake, given the value of preserving their kidney function and avoiding dialysis, lifelong dialysis or kidney transplant, the price that you can charge for for the product is significant. So, this is as well as being fantastic for patients, it's fantastic for healthcare systems, saving money. It's a fantastic investment proposition, because, I think I've said,
because of the numbers involved.
the numbers and the average selling prices that are achievable, and therefore the gross margin that is achievable. So it's a great opportunity, and we're very confident that we can make it work.
But what was your biggest challenge in the early days, do you think? How do you kind of look back and crystallize some of that?
Gosh, I think as the CEO, obviously you live with a plethora of issues at any one time. But if I was to single out the thing that kept me awake at night the most, and particularly in the early days, it would be getting money, fundraising.
Yeah.
So, this is, as everyone knows, a very expensive business, and it requires lots of money over many years before you get a sniff back. And even if you can demonstrate that you have a really compelling investment proposition, I don't think that's not a guarantee that you're going to find investors to back the business. So that's that for me, I think is, certainly in the early days, the biggest problem, the biggest challenge. I mean, we partly good fortune, and partly, I hope, also us doing some of the right things along the way. We managed to construct an excellent syndicate of VCs, and also a corporate VC, and we managed to do that quite early in the journey. So our very first investor, when we spun out of Edinburgh University, was Mercia, and hat tip to Mercia for supporting, at that earliest of stages. But by the time of the next round, we had actually attracted another VC and a corporate VC,
right?
And Old College Capital, the university's fund, and Scottish Enterprise into a syndicate. And then the round after that, we attracted two more investors, another VC, and an ultra high net worth called Jonathan Milner, who probably well known to the life scientists listening to this. So Jonathan is a prodigious investor in early stage life science companies in the UK, and we're very fortunate that we're included in Jonathan's portfolio. So for a company like ours, it's high risk, needs a lot of money. Being able to spread the risk across a large number of parties, I think, is very desirable, and has been hugely helpful. And one of those investors, as I say, is a corporate. That's they used to be until recently called Solvay. They changed their name recently. They're now called Syensqo. But Solvay or Syensqo is a global materials manufacturer, headquartered in Brussels, listed on the French market. They're a CAC 30 company. They're part of the main index, and amongst many other things, they are the leading supplier worldwide of the polymer from which dialysis filters are made. So it's their polymer, which is invoking the foreign body response that we are trying to prevent. So, we're you can see the synergy there. So they Syensco is a polymer science company, and they're interested in how do you marry polymer science with biotech to create something better for patients. Getting them involved early doors was really was a massive leg up for us, because it validated our proposition to a large extent.
So what was it then, do you think, that was the moment at which, or was there a kind of relationship or a network or something there that kind of unleashed that? Was it Mercier getting involved, Mercier first off, and then sort of unlocking that community, or was there someone before that actually kind of helped all of that process along, or what was it? Where was the kind of trigger moment? Where did it come from?
So I don't think there's a moment. I can point to one of a few things. So Mercier, at around the time, not that long before Invizius was looking to spin out from Edinburgh University, Mercier had done a deal with Edinburgh University whereby Mercier, sort of basically committed to financing attractive spin-outs from the university. I mean, I think committed is probably too strong a word, but they had a collaboration agreement. And that was signed not very long before we spun out of the university. And so the fortunate thing for us was the timing of that, because I think everybody around the table was quite keen to get the first deal done and show that this collaboration was real and was working. That's not to say that Mercier would have financed any old spin out. I think we were, I think it was a good investment. Absolutely. But I think the timing was fortunate. Now, what about the other players? Well, in the case of Solvay, now Syensco, they were coming out of a strategic review of that particular part of their business.
Right.
And they, as part of that strategic review, they'd actually identified this little spin out in Scotland that was doing something interesting sounding.
Okay.
And so it was one of those rare moments. If you're a CEO that spends his or her time raising finance, you'll know what I mean by this. It's one of those rare moments when an investor approaches you and with an interest, as opposed to you pitching like crazy and hoping to pique their interest. So they came to us, their interest having already been piqued. And that it's a lot easier to get investment with that background. So we were fortunate there. The other, the other investors, and this is the case with all of the other investors, apart from perhaps Old College Capital, because they already had skin in the game as we were a university spin out, and Scottish Enterprise, who were co-investors with a couple of the VCs. But the other investors, it's it's the result of a lot of hard work. It's getting out there, talking to as many people as you can, and eventually serendipitously, really, because you can't really plan for this. I mean, you can you can go to the right events, you can try to talk to the right people and create the right network and so on and so forth. But you can't anticipate who's going to bite.
So you're covering the ground on the basis that you cover the ground. You don't know how much ground you have to cover, but just keep covering until something happens.
You keep going, and the reality is that of course it takes a long time. So even the investor that eventually bites might be somebody that you first talked to years before, and actually that was the case with Jonathan Milner. Right. It's not Jonathan himself. He has a small staff who go out and find deals for him, but it's called Meltwind. I met Meltwind probably for the first time in 2018. And I'm trying to think now, when did they actually invest? Must have been it was either 2020 or 2021. So it was 2 or 3 years after the very first time I met with Meltwind and pitched Invizius. And, in 2018, there wasn't an interest. I can't remember why. But by the time 2020 or 2021 came along, there was. So, I wager that if I hadn't already been in touch with them, the result may have been different.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you've got to plant lots of seeds, and most of them will die.
Some will flourish, and it's those ones that keep coming back.
So there is, as I say, there is a lot of serendipity in the process, I feel. And some skill.
But I think, from what you're describing there, the reality is huge amount of legwork. Just keep going, keep covering the ground, and serendipity, yes. But on the other hand, it only occurs when you've done the legwork. So it's not something that's going to kind of happen just by a process of pure luck, unless it's a Solvay type kind of situation. But you can't rely on that. Got to do the legwork and so on, and perhaps even some of that, I don't know, would get onto the radar of people who are researching companies that have been invested in, or whatever, who've got an interest in a similar technology or whatever. So okay.
And I think it's worth saying, it's worth saying it's whilst as the CEO you might be the main door opener. Ultimately, closing an investment is a team effort. I have fantastic colleagues who provide so much of the puzzle that ultimately the investor is buying into. So I can open the door, but I absolutely depend on my colleagues to help walk us through it.
What do you think then have been perhaps the biggest distractions that you've had kind of along the way on the journey? What have you kind of, I don't know, come across that really has just gotten your way?
Am I allowed to say COVID? The C word?
Yeah, you are. Black swan events, too many of them.
Yeah, I mean, COVID might seem a bit hackneyed at this point, but I mean, it was a significant issue for many companies. I think in our own case, we were fortunate that we had moved from sort of incubation space at Edinburgh University to our current space at BioCity just before the pandemic really bit and we went into lockdown. That was really fortunate because if we had still been at the university, we would have been locked out of the lab and we wouldn't have been able to progress. BioCity we had some more freedom to continue working, doing work in the labs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, essential.
Yeah.
But that time we were transferring our manufacturing process to a CMO.
Right.
That CMO is in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And we were unable to visit them, and they were unable to visit us.
Right.
And we're speaking different languages.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were all speaking in English because, of course, we were not going to be speaking Spanish, right? That the COVID was really debilitating in respect of that. The transfer of the manufacturing process.
That must have been very tough.
It was really very challenging and problematic, and we incurred a significant delay, which we can blame on COVID, I think. There were things that we could have done. There were problems that arose that wouldn't have arisen had we been able to go to their facility and vice versa. So I think
those problems are probably unheard of, that they would ever be kind of resolved without that close visiting and cross fertilization of ideas and so on and so forth. I can't imagine that's something that transfers well onto Zoom calls.
No, that's right. I mean, you're talking about major sort of significant manufacturing issues that boil down to subtle differences in the way that a piece of equipment is operated.
Mm-hmm.
And these are things that may not even be captured by the documentation that describes the manufacturing process.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of local
nuances,
differences in practice, which, as it turned out, you never knew. You would never have anticipated, but turned out actually to be really important. So I'm sorry to be blaming COVID as the biggest distraction, but I think genuinely it has been or was.
Yeah, I mean, I think very much slap bang in the middle of it. Possibly further down the line, it might have been a different challenge, might have been a more formidable one, but probably unlikely. But where you were, sounds like it was crucial enough, without a shadow of a doubt. If you had an opportunity to go back and give yourself advice on the journey you've just been on, what would it be?
I think my response is going to be a very personal one, because this isn't really to do with Invizius, nothing to do with the business. But more to do with me and sustaining the role of CEO in this type of business over an extended period. It's you and I have talked about this before. It's tough and it's lonely, and it's like a roller coaster. Whilst you do get highs, you also get lows. There are inevitably things that don't go the way you'd hope they would go. We're doing research, in effect. It's R&D, it's high risk, things happen, and I think one of the challenges of this role is remaining resilient over extended periods of time, despite the setbacks.
So
I think my advice to me would be, to try and maintain a very high level of philosophical reflection, to try and remain sane. You know, I well, not to put too fine a point on it. I think, you know, I've found my, 6 years in, my resilience has worn down significantly. Yeah, so I think, I think that, I mean, that's inevitable, I think, to a greater or lesser extent. And I think, even getting help to keep your keep your distance, but remain objective, not take the knocks too personally. This sort of thing. I think I think I would be tutoring myself to say, look, it's not going to be easy, but like Boris Becker famously said, having won Wimbledon and then lost Wimbledon the following year. I can't remember exactly what the occasion was, but the German press were absolutely up in arms that he'd lost. It was a disaster. And he came back in a video, in a press conference, and said it was a game of tennis. It wasn't a war. No one died. Right. So a useful perspective, keeping perspective as the CEO of a business like this, I think is what you need to do.
It's quite a challenge though, because I think you put so much into these things feel kind of very personal. I mean, I think it is. It's much easier to see than it is to live. I think in my experience, and to myself, talking to others, and so on. I think because to some extent the business is you, or can be you, or you're certainly a major part of it, or whatever. It's the highs and lows are you as well. So it's pretty tough to just take the two apart and stand back objectively and say, oh well, that's life. Riding high in the April shutdown in May or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that's the car gone and the house sold and and I'm living in a caravan, down on the A1. So
well, as someone that spends his summer holidays in the caravan and at the end of the month of Kintyre, I'm not fazed by that.
Finally, then, what's the plan for the future of Invizius?
We're back at fundraising, and our next big round will fund our next clinical study, so phase 2 or proof of concept study. So we're hoping to have raised a big round in 2024, so that we can crack on with that study early 2025. And that will be a multi-center randomized control study of patients with severe acute kidney injury,
right?
Who are having to go on to dialysis. So kind of as I described earlier, we're trying to save their kidneys from damage from the dialysis procedure, so that they recover more quickly and more surely. And so that will be that's the next study. We're sort of going through the details of that study at the moment. I mean, that will be a huge sort of value inflection for the business, because we'll actually come out of that study, with hard clinical data on the effect that HGuard has on patients.
Brilliant.
If we're successful in that study, and I've no reason to believe we won't be, we would be in a great position to get into some commercial deal or partnership with dialysis equipment manufacturer or a pharma company for a phase 3 clinical study and subsequent commercialization of the product. So that's in a nutshell what the way we're heading.
Well, future holds. Great. Well, it sounds like a fantastic mission, and to be frank, I mean, this has been really quite enlightening for me, because there's a lot of things that you think you know, but I don't really, and you've filled in a lot of gaps for me.
Right. Well, it's a pleasure.
I'm sure you have
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat.
No problem at all. That was wonderful.